Hello everyone. Today I'm going to tell you an incredibly exciting story from a novel. The protagonist, of all the audacious things she does, actually charges into the battlefield while pregnant. Isn't this contrast shocking? Now let's delve into this thrilling tale together. Chapter 44. I bit into a crisp apple, my eyes drawn to the fresh mark adorning Tiffany's collarbone. Nathan's posture exuded a newfound ease, his possessive nature seemingly satisfied by the visible claim on his partner. With a sarcastic smirk, I couldn't resist commenting, Well, now I know why you two were conspicuously absent last night." Tiffany's confident grin lit up her face as she retorted, unrepentant as ever, "We made it longer than you two did. Besides, Nathan has told me that he loves my lingerie collection." Nathan leaned in close, his lips barely grazing Tiffany's ear as he murmured, "Ah, but they are much lovelier when they adorn your body." Despite his attempt at discretion, our keen hearing picked up every word. Ever disapproving of public displays of affection, shook her head in faint disgust and proclaimed, "Okay, you two, not at the breakfast table." The couple shared a mischievous grin before returning their attention to their meals. As I finished my apple, Ruby approached, her usually aloof demeanor softened by an unexpected enthusiasm. "Sylvia is hoping that we can check out the eastern forest in hopes of more truffles. Care to join me? Half of that area is under bramble bushes." "Sure. Come find me once breakfast is over," I replied, my observant nature already cataloging the subtle changes in Ruby's behavior. She nodded and went to grab her own breakfast. Tiffany shook her head, still perplexed by the fight of the typically hard fighter volunteering for truffle hunting. I carefully extracted a truffle from the damp earth, the pungent aroma filling my nostrils. Ruby sat nearby, her tall frame preventing her from joining me under the sprawling bramble bush. I carried the prized fungus over to her before resuming my exploration of the undersides of thorny plants. As my nose focused on detecting the distinct scent of truffles, my mind wandered freely. It had been 3 days since my discovery, and I had managed to discreetly dispose of the tests in a dumpster behind a restaurant, my willingness to help tempered by the need for secrecy. I kept mulling ideas over in my mind on how to tell Will. I kind of wanted to surprise him, but was sure how. It was something that I had ever contemplated. Oddly enough, I figured that if I could get Tiffany alone, she would have some great ideas as she didn't scream the secret out at the top of her lungs the very instant she found out. Evan's voice rang out across the pack, white-mind link with authority. "We are under attack. All non-fighters retreat to the safe houses. On-duty warriors head to the southern border. All other fighters protect the safe houses." I ran out from under the thorn bush, and Ruby grabbed me by the scruff of my neck before racing back to town full tilt. Will's voice entered my mind, and I could feel his enforcer abilities fully awakened at the front of his mind. "Jade, where are you?" "About 10 minutes from town the way Ruby is running. We are heading for a safe house." He sighed in relief. "Good. Stay safe." I had no intentions of dying anytime soon and sent a wordless agreement and love down the link. His presence faded from my mind as he dropped the link as he continued to race to the border to help with the threat. Ruby made it to the nearest of the 3 safe houses, and the gathered fighters parted to let her and others through. Ruby didn't put me down until we were inside. She immediately turned and left as a fighter. She was needed outside. I glanced around the room at the various elderly people, women and children. A couple of women were pregnant and holding their stomachs. All in here were non-combatants, those who wanted to attempt to help the defenders, but only had minimal training or ability were kept close to the doors. I was here since a runt wouldn't be as strong or as fast as another wolf. I shifted into human form and sat in a corner before extending my senses. I could feel the anger and protective mindset of the fighters outside. Those inside were either worried, afraid, or were bored and simply waiting to be let out. I didn't think it was a practice drill, though. My omega senses had picked up undertones in both Evan's and Will's mind voice that had me on edge. I pushed my senses further away, sensing similar situations at the other two safe houses. The pack-mind link had various discussions going at once, but no one had lost a mate or family member yet. My instincts that had been honed in no man's land were telling me that something was wrong, though. I strained my senses as I pushed my awareness past the town's edge. These senses had never been meant for long-distance usage, and I couldn't extend them that far. I saw a few sparks that were lone attackers racing through the forest around the town. This mere handful wouldn't even be a challenge for the defenders outside. But how had they gotten this far when at least 100 warriors were along the border? I went to touch Will's mind and tried to get a sense of what he was up to. But his mind was blocked. I shifted uneasily as I tried to find a way through it. The block washed a mind shield that one could raise if they chose. This was in uniwaries that I had only felt once when someone had been knocked out cold. Was Will okay? My heart contracted as I thought of him injured. He was an enforcer and would probably be leading any attack. As a powerful fighter, any enforcer would also be a main target to attempt to cripple a pack's defenses. I did know that he was alive, and I hadn't felt any major disturbances in the mate bond that would alert me if he had been seriously injured. Something was adding up, and I didn't like it. I mind-linked Truby, who was standing guard outside. He's cautioned something isn't right. I can't find Will through the mate bond. It is like he is unconscious. Do you have any idea what is going on? Her mind voice was tight with strain. None of the enforcers are responding. Most of the warriors are also silent. We have no idea what is going on at the border. Do not open the door unless we mind blink you that it is safe. Keep your eyes open. Some attackers are bound to have slipped through the cracks if we can't get through to our fighters. My mind voice was worried, but I was keeping calm. I could feel my survival instincts kicking in, and I was beginning to wish that I had remained in the forest and gone down a rabbit burrow. I was cornered in here, and the sheer number of fighters in the area outside more or less screamed that a safe house was somewhere in the vicinity. I was worried for Will. Most attackers would kill enforcers given a chance since they were the biggest threat. I kept trying the mate bond, but got no response. I tried to think of ideas as I listened to the main pack link. People kept calling out across the link, but fewer of the more distant warriors responded. There was no way that my senses could reach much beyond the edge of the town, and zero chance of sensing what was going on at the border. I pushed my senses to their limits. Once more, the handful of strangers were still circling the area, but didn't approach the fighters. What were they waiting for? I was sure that I wanted to know the answer. Chapter 45. An anxious hour later, my head shot up as I mind-linked Ruby. Watch the forest to the west. Something is approaching, and it isn't ours. I felt her jump at my frantic mind call before focusing on the forest with fresh attention. I could sense the intruders now, that they were close enough. At least 100 were approaching, and none of them were my pack members. All of the warriors had fallen silent over the last hour, leaving the safe house fighters nervous and on edge. Any who went to try and scout also fell silent shortly after they encountered the enemy. The strangest thing was that all of them still lived. None had died yet. This safe house was the closest to the approaching group, and they were obviously heading here. I felt our fighters get angry and uneasy as the attackers appeared along the tree line in both wolf and human forms. They slowly advanced until the defenders closest to them were goaded into an attack. One by one, they dropped into dark glimmers of unconsciousness. The attackers had minor injuries from the clash, but that was it. I hesitated for a moment before mind-linking Ruby. Run to Trevor and Mike's back for help. They are putting people to sleep somehow. Anyone who tried to fight them are dropping like flies. I was surprised when she replied. The Alpha and Beta are already aware, and they are heading there now for reinforcements. It will take them at least 6 hours to get here, though. Her mind voice was intently focused and ready for the fight. The Alpha and Beta were away, visiting with another pack. Thankfully, they had been on their way back and were it that far away from Trevor's pack. I hoped that the reinforcements would arrive soon. Ruby was right in front of the safe house door, waiting for them to close the distance. She refused to be lured into a fight and was biding her time. I hoped that it would be enough. The attackers would close in until a few fighters attacked them, before backing up to examine the more restrained defenders. I slowly got to my feet. There were only a dozen fighters left standing outside at this point. Instinctively, I tried to scent the air, but it was useless in here. I narrowed my eyes in rage as I felt the last 12 lights flicker into dim shimmers almost simultaneously, one of which was Ruby. The attackers had not been close to our last defenders. What was going on? They had neutralized our fighters at a distance, and our defenders had not even had a chance to mind link the group inside to warn us. Ruby had been giving me short updates of their actions until just moments ago. I knew that she would have told me if she knew she was in trouble so that I would have warning. Yet she hadn't. The instincts that I had picked up during my days as a rogue were screaming that something was not right. I had never heard of anything like this before, and it had me seriously on edge. I narrowed my eyes and backed into the corner. The wall I was touching was the one that held the door. Our defenders were being dragged away as the intruders closed in on the door. Several women were already in hysterics because they called in contact their mates, and their children were mirroring their mother's distress. Dead silence fell as a huge bang echoed across the room. All eyes locked onto the door. Another bang vibrated the heavy steel door. People moved away from the door in fear. The door was thick reinforced steel specifically designed to severely slow attackers and give the fighters time to regain lost ground. However, no door in the world could stop a force that had all the time in the world to break it down. Minutes later, the door busted open as women and children screamed. Bags of powder were thrown into the room. I swiftly put a Kleenex over my nose, but I could still pick up the potent scent of the herb that rendered the mind link inert. No wonder we had been unable to mind link others. A couple of large, heavily armored men started pushing their way into the room amidst the sudden cacophony of people screaming as they tried to get away in a room with only one door. I blinked as I noticed that lethal weapons were absent. These massive men were relying on their strength, size, and armor to protect them. They had an odd paddle with a long handle and tiny little barbs on it. My eyes widened as I noticed that each person they attacked with it swiftly fell to the floor. My nose could pick up the faint scent of a powerful tranquilizer that must be on their weapons. They had expected our reaction, but I had been a rogue for too many years and was used to trying to guess my opponent's strategy to find any loophole. I saw one potential tactic to take them by surprise. If I misjudged, I ran right into their hands. If they weren't prepared for it, I had a slight chance of escaping. I used my senses to quickly note the lines of men outside who were waiting to come in and grab those who were unconscious. The 3 men had entered the room and slowly moved forward. Everyone moved away from them, noticeably against the far wall. I took a deep breath and called on all of my abilities that I had picked as a rogue and Omega. I turned my passive stance ability to the max. It would have a hard time focusing on me now. I shifted into wolf form and darted between the feet of those pressing against me. I ran along the wall at full speed and was almost out the door before someone noticed my tiny gray shape in the shadows. Catch the pup heading towards the door. They had not been expecting anyone to approach them. Ed had given me precious seconds. I spread my senses around me so they could warn me of anyone approaching. I sensed some come towards the door to intercept me. I launched myself at the door jamb and ricocheted off at an angle. I darted between 2 men and ran full tilt for the forest while using evasive maneuvers. The unexpected maneuvers and the fact that they couldn't concentrate or truly focus on me had them off balance. They had expected to catch a clumsy puppy, not an agile runt. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I felt something brush by my fur, but I didn't look back to see what had narrowly missed me. Several had shifted and were hot on my trail. One jumped at me, and I swiftly changed direction to run under low branches. If they valued their eyes, they would have to go around, which they did. To were gaining on me in an open stretch, I ricocheted off another tree and gained valuable distance away from them. I put all of my speed as I raced for a massive bramble bush. A wolf caught up to me, and I felt his claws brush my tail. My heart hammered as I felt him reach down to grab my neck, and I put on another desperate burst of speed. I heard his scream right behind me as he realized, moments too late, that the plant had been covered in massive evil thorns. I changed direction once more as I kept running. The others that had been following me were distracted by their friend's agony. It gave me time to pull the disappearing act that had frustrated Ruby so many times in the past. Chapter 46. I silently dropped onto the branch beside Jisk as we both watched the invading group hauling unconscious people to various locations along the town's main street. I have never seen anything like this before. Jisk's murmur was barely audible. I replied equally as quietly. I can't remember anything like this in any of the stories anyone ever told me. Do you see how they are splitting up the groups by gender, age, and fighting ability? He hummed lightly. Yes, those 3 enforcers are very heavily bound and being kept separate too. Yeah, don't remind me. I growled faintly. If it weren't for the fact that I couldn't even lift those chains in either form, I probably would have attempted to free them. The mate bond is giving me more than a bit of grief at this point in time. He also gave a faint growl at the situation and his frustration with it. I am somewhat handicapped in this situation as well. My eyes moved to the one group of tied-up people who still hadn't woken up. That group is well to the side, and I can always eye them later so you don't have to go near her. With a grunt, he replied, "Doesn't surprise me that you noticed. How long have you known?" I rummaged around in my backpack and passed him a small sealed Ziploc baggie with a small handful of leaves in it. About 2 weeks after arriving, I finally connected the dots. He examined the leaves. Thanks. I might need them. I nodded without comment. Those leaves had a potent scent. If rubbed beneath the nose, they were actually powerful enough to prevent one from even detecting the scent of their mate. If he used them, this also meant that he wouldn't be able to smell anything else either. It was more of a last resort thing if he had to go near her. Second chance mate bonds relied more on looking into each other's eyes, and they didn't always pick up one another's scent till after eye contact. Although how she had missed his scent as it crisscrossed the land was beyond me. Jisk was watching the massive scar-covered man in the middle of the town who was barking orders at everyone. He said, "I think if we can remove the guy in charge, this group might just fall into anarchy. Most do not seem to be here willingly. He may be holding their mates hostage." I said, "I was thinking that as well. But first, we need to find the guy in charge." Jisk gave me an odd look. "You are thinking the demanding loudmouth down there isn't the one in charge. No one else has dared contradict him. I know that he is not the one in charge," I said, once more looking at the town. "He is a second in command. Look at how he pauses occasionally when a decision needs to be made. He isn't just thinking, he is mind-linking." Jisk growled lowly as he quickly came to the same conclusion I had. He said, "HES a decoy in case someone wants to take out the leader." Exactly. Now we just need to find where he is. And he can't be far since there doesn't seem to be any strain when those two are mind-linking. I explored this half of the forest already, but my senses can't reach the other side from here. Jisk smoothly rose into a crouch. "Let's go." I rose and followed him as we traversed the forest highway without a sound. Jisk glowered at the stand of trees in the middle of the large meadow as he told me, "I do not like this plan." With a shrug, I said, "There isn't any way for you to get across the grass unnoticed. You have your own part as well, and it is riskier than mine." He snorted. "If I thought that you actually believed it last sentence, I would tie you up and take both of them out myself, unless you have an alternative plan." He sighed and shook his head in frustration. "No, this is the best we have been able to come up with. I just don't like the thought of sending you off alone." He turned to face me, and his dark eyes stared into mine. "Do not take any risks. You aren't a match for any of them. Do what you have to do and run. Whatever you do, don't get caught." I nodded before shifting and scampering out of sight in the sprawling thorny bushes. How lucky for me that the Alpha had chosen to camp in a small stand of trees that stood in the middle of a big meadow just east of town. There were lots of sprawling thorn bushes in this area, and numerous large trees as well. I eyed up the tall grass before leaving the shelter of the thorns to crawl through it towards the stand of the trees in the middle. I had previously cloaked my scent to match this clearing perfectly. Even Jisk couldn't pick up my scent. I crawled through the grass that was barely tall enough to hide me. I hoped that no one would detect me, Chapter 47. I was high up in a tree, well hidden in the leaves and branches of the canopy as I watched the mess of Alpha pacing below. His eyes were out of focus more often than not, showing that he was mind-linking his people almost steadily. I carefully chose an arrow and pulled the tiny vial of liquid out of my pack. It was an extremely nasty poison, a mixture of extracts from several deadly plants and venom from several different species of snakes. Jisk had given it to me, and I didn't doubt its potency. This was the deadliest one he had in his arsenal. It should be able to kill even an alpha in less than 5 minutes. I dripped the thick liquid onto the arrow, coating the arrowhead and part of the shaft. I carefully noked the arrow and drew my bow as I turned my attention to the alpha below. I had studied his pacing earlier. He had beaten down a circle in the grass and circled it continuously. I waited for the longer period of awareness while he thought through a complex decision. I would strike when he went to relay precise and detailed information over the mind link. There, I loosed my arrow before instantly shifting and jumping into the hollow in the tree behind me. I heard a roar of fury and a grunt as he yanked the arrow out. The clock was ticking. I just had to keep out of his reach now. Hopefully, it wouldn't even cross his mind to check the hollow so high up the tree. It was as if a regular werewolf would be able to fit in it in either form. I spread my senses out as I tracked him. He was searching the bushes in the area as he started to stumble. My senses could just reach the town. The attackers milled uneasily, unsure of why their alpha was suddenly so furious. I blinked as I realized that several of those who were tied up were starting to wake up. I prodded my mate Bond, but it was still unresponsive. They had likely given the enforcers a much higher dose to keep them down. I felt the alpha's legs give out. His presence shimmered as he was losing the battle with the toxins. He wouldn't be able to catch me at this point. I lifted my head to peek out of the opening. He was on the ground, staring towards the town while mind-linking. I climbed out of the hollow and shifted before climbing down to the bushes on the forest floor. I stepped out of the bushes in wolf form, making sure to step on a few twigs to announce my presence. The alpha's head turned in my direction, as he tried unsuccessfully to sit up. I tilted my head in puppy-like manner at his incredulous expression, before turning and running off into the undergrowth. I felt him shift into his wolf form and heard his furious snarl behind me, but he barely staggered a few steps before collapsing on the ground once more. I crossed the meadow before shifting and using the forest highway to get close to town undetected. I was surprised to see that the enforcers were awake, if groggy. About half of the pack was also awake. The high tension among the attackers was almost visible as they milled around. They knew their alpha was in serious condition. The attackers all froze as a tremor passed through them. For an instant, silence reigned before loud snarls and growls echoed across the town. Their alpha had died, but was struggling wildly against his bonds. Realizing that I was nearby via the mate Bond, I had my mental shields up so he couldn't distract me. I lowered my shield slightly. Ever heard of a poker face? If they realize that you have a mate running around, they will use you to get to me. Then they will use me to control you. With a deep growl, Will reluctantly ceased his struggles. What are you doing here? Run away. I sent my denial down the link. Not yet. Help is on the way. But I have to do one thing before I use all of the tricks up my sleeve to put as much distance between me and these attackers as I can. Please, if you love me, do not react to what I am about to do. Any reaction of yours might put me in more danger than anything else if they realize that you are my mate. I felt his worry, but raised my shields before he could reply. Will could kill me later for the dangerous stunt I was about to attempt. Hopefully, I would survive. I had never had 100 pissed off wolves out for my blood before. Chapter 48. I ready to poise an arrow and took aim at the milling group. Things in the attackers' organization were starting to fall apart. But just as Jisk and I had assumed, there were a couple below who were keeping the original plan, whatever it was, in motion. I could sense Jisk as he got into place and readied himself. I stepped out from behind the tree and loosed my arrow at the third in command. I promptly shifted into wolf form and hid behind a large log. That guy had been keeping most of the attackers in line. He screamed in pain as his hands gripped, the arrow lodged in his stomach. Heads turned toward him before spinning in the direction of the tree line as they tried to spot the archer. I took a deep breath to build up my courage. If I had been wearing boots, I would have been shaking in them. I must be insane. Why had I agreed to this? I jumped on top of the log. There. One had immediately spotted me. I lifted my head proudly before grinning at those who were now looking at me with various expressions. The attackers knew I was the one who had also killed their alpha. Even a pack held together by threats felt the urge to kill the one who killed their alpha with a deceitful ambush. A massive dark brown wolf launched out of a window to land on the second in command. He was taken completely by surprise since he had been distracted by my appearance, and I heard the snap of the man's neck from where I stood. The wolf immediately attacked a couple of the largest fighters who happened to be near him. The commotion had everyone focusing on them. I turned and darted into the undergrowth in the distraction. I felt several closer to me start to come after me, while a few others were taking their chance and running away. I darted down a rabbit burrow. This one was well known to me and larger than average. I quickly went out the far exit with my pursuers sniffing and digging at the entrance. I brushed against a pine so my scent was closer to this part of the forest. Once I was a safe distance away, I shifted and climbed a tree before heading back to the edge of the forest near the town. I took care to remain completely hidden as I examined the chaos below. Jisk had disappeared, although by the half a dozen bodies, he had left his mark. Several of the attackers were in loud arguments over who was now in charge and what should be done. I felt Jisk approach and glanced over as he climbed up on the other side of the tree. I saw a few minor scratches, but neither saw nor sensed anything more serious. I said, "Good job. Do you think anyone left will be elected leader easily?" Jisk grinned at my compliment. "I am not sure. I wasn't paying much attention since I was trying to cover my scent to hide the blood splatter. I assume you didn't have too many problems with the alpha or your pursuers." I shook my head as I replied, "I got lucky with that one. The alpha didn't even know where to look for me until I showed myself. These guys have obviously never been rogues. The three chasing me were completely baffled by my journey into the rabbit hole. Any idea who might be winning the alpha election down there? Give me a moment." I pushed my senses out to pick up the undercurrent of emotions and tendencies in the attacking group. Something else got my attention though. Wow. Will is absolutely furious. I have no idea how he is looking so calm or remaining in control. I almost pity the one who untees him. Oh, wait a minute. I had felt a brush against my mind, and I had recognized it even through my mental shields. "Alpha, were you trying to contact me?" I felt his relief at finally getting a response. "What is going on? Why isn't anyone else responding?" I gave him a mental image of the scene in front of me. We just managed to take out the first 4 in command and 3 of their top fighters. Right now, they are bickering over who gets to call the shots. None of our pack are dead, but all were exposed to a herb that blocks the mind link and many were tranquilized. Although the tranquilizer is wearing off, it looks like about half of their force is Iran threats and are quickly scattering in all directions. If you circle around and come up from the south, you will catch them by surprise since they think that they cleared that direction. The mate bond was working since it was so powerful, but the general pack link was still down. The whiff I had gotten must have worn off. The alpha paused, likely relaying my information to those he was traveling with. He spoke to me once more. "We will come up from the south. Then, Trevor and my car with me, along with a large group of their warriors. We are just crossing the border now, so we will be there shortly. I know you aren't a trained fighter, so please stay safe until we take care of the intruders." "All right. I will remain in hiding near the town in case you need to call me." He sent a silent affirmative down the mind link before fading out. I told Jisk, "The cavalry is coming and should be here within 15 minutes. The alpha came with the neighboring packs Alpha, Theta, and most of their warriors. They are going to loop around and come up from the south." Jisk sighed in relief. "Oh, good. They can finish up the battle. They won't get much resistance at this point." Chapter 49. I stood beneath the tree beside Jisk as we watched the rescuers tying up a few attackers who surrendered before they started to untie and untame the pack. Jisk eventually sighed. I am glad that the battle is over and no innocents got hurt. I was in full agreement with him. Thank goodness. I was really worried about them for a while. Jisk's emotions shifted to longing, sadness, unease, uncertainty, and echoes of an old pain as he gazed over to the side. I spoke quietly. If you want, I can steal a pair of sunglasses from Will for you to wear, and you can use those leaves to block her scent. I can make her do the same if you want to talk with her without the mate bond playing havoc with your minds. He thought for a moment as hope and anticipation started to rise. I would love to do that. Perhaps in 3 days. That will give the pack some time to recover and give her a chance to run for the hills if the thought of being with a rogue gives her second thoughts. I grinned at him. Honest. She won't run for the hills because of that. If you pay any attention to what she has been up to in the last 2 months since I arrived, you would know that a rogue's abilities intrigue her. He wrapped one arm around my waist and gave me a quick hug. Thanks, kiddo. Sincerity rang in his words. You're welcome. I returned the hug. I was honestly happy for him. He deserved a second chance at love. It was rare for Jisk to show emotion like this. I knew the pain that he carried from when his original mate rejected him to marry an Alpha 4 power. The Alpha had used an Alpha command on Jisk to force him to leave the pack and never come back. I was pretty sure that I was the only one he had ever told. And I never spoke of it. Jisk had been like a father to me. He had mostly raised me once I had entered no man's land. Jisk released a gusty sigh as he dropped his arm. His body tensed slightly as he took a deep, slow breath, testing the air. He moved his head closer to me and took a second breath. Oh. He lowered his wide eyes to meet mine. His emotions were forming a whirlwind. Busted. His voice was tight as he spoke slowly. Please tell me that you were unaware that you were pregnant when you joined the fight. He sounded as if he was pretty sure he knew the answer. I was filled with chagrin. Of all people to notice. Letting someone expecting a child get in the way of any possible harm was right up there with rejection in Jisk's mind. No sense lying or displaying either. He would pick it up instantly. I saw it in defeat. I realized a couple of days ago. Jisk's anger grew, and I waited for his explosion with trepidation. I was surprised when it didn't come. His anger dropped into heavy irritation. If I had realized that, I would have tied you up and hidden you deep in the woods while I took them all out. I can't believe you didn't tell me before I let you go off on your own. I grinned shakily at my lucky break. I can believe that you would do that too. It kind of slipped my mind with Will tied up like a turkey. I am not far enough along for it to have slowed me down yet. He growled a reprimand at my idiocy. He glanced to the side of town where the enforcers were tied up. Not that we could see them from this angle. Does Will know? I grimaced. Thankfully, not yet. I had been trying to find a way to surprise him with the news. Luckily, no one else around has a nose as keen as yours. He chuckled despite himself. You mean, you have been putting it off so he doesn't put you under house arrest like any typical enforcer husband. I stuck out my tongue at him. You are going to have to come by regularly to visit your niece or nephew, or I will be most upset with you. He blinked in surprise. You are letting me be an uncle. He was honestly shocked, although excitement was building underneath. Grinning at him, I said, Well, it is either that or Grandpa, but that makes you sound kind of old if you ask me. He laughed. No, I much prefer uncle. Although I never thought I would ever have the chance to hear the word from a child. He was practically on cloud 9. I had never sensed emotions like this from him before. I grinned at his excitement. I glanced over my senses, tracking various individuals in the town. It looks like they are starting on the enforcers' chains. I said, I am going to head down to ensure that Will Dosen kills someone in his desire to get free. I am going to tie up some loose ends, and I will be back in 3 days. I will meet you in that small meadow where you gave your first lesson in tracking masked scents. It somehow didn't surprise me that he had managed to watch me teach that class without anyone noticing. I waved goodbye as he disappeared into the trees like a ghost. I went to go find Will. Chapter 50. I rounded the corner to see a couple of men from the rescuing group trying various tools on the heavy chains while all three enforcers were forced to wait impatiently to be freed. Will was close to Lee. I dropped my mind shield and mind linked him with humor in my voice. Relax, Will. They will have you free shortly. They are trying to help you. Don't be so ungrateful. His panicked and worried voice immediately responded. Where are you? Are you all right? I had been walking up silently behind him and put my hand on his shoulder as I spoke aloud. I am right here. He jumped with the contact in my voice. The sparks let him immediately know who it was, and he let out a huge sigh of relief. Don't startle me like that. I was so worried about you. Are you all right? He craned his head around to try and see me. I walked to the side and sat on the ground beside him. I'm fine. I just shot 2 arrows and ran. JISK was the only one to get close to anyone. That got Will going again. Why on earth didn't you run away before then? You didn't stand a chance against any of them. What would you have done if they caught you? I rubbed my hand on and unsheathed his arms to try and calm him. I know, I said. That is why I only shot 2 arrows that were loaded with poison. Other than that, I ran and hid. You know how hard I am to catch and track if I put my mind to it. I pulled every trick out of the book, and I lost them within seconds. It was probably best to let him assume that I was nearly impossible to catch. I was not about to mention the time that Phil had caught me. He still didn't know about that. For the safety of the 4-pack members who had originally chased me in no man's land, it was better if Will never found out. Will took a deep breath, and I felt him trying to calm himself before exhaling gusti. He grumbled, I can't wait until these chains are off. The 2 men testing out various hacksaws and cutters glanced up. The one commented, Honest, we are trying. You ought to be flattered that they use such heavy-duty and expensive chains to bind you. Will narrowed his eyes and growled faintly. I rolled my eyes and poked him in the ribs as I said, Be nice. They are trying to free you. If they leave, I wouldn't even have a clue where to start. Will pressed his lips together and refrained from commenting. I glanced up as Alpha Roland approached, along with Trevor and Mike. I nodded a greeting at them. Alphas, Beta, thank you for coming to the rescue. Alpha Trevor nodded, dropping his disguise of Beta. He said, I am glad we made it in time. Luckily, we didn't lose any men in the attack either. I am happy to hear that. Roll and bent down to touch and examine the chains binding Will. He glanced at the men trying to damage the chains and inquired, Why are these chains so much more difficult to cut than the other ones? He was truly curious and was not belittling their progress. One of them responded, Alpha, they are a specialty chain designed to hold enforcers if they show signs of going feral. Roll and narrowed his eyes. Someone obviously came prepared. Tony was still tied up, and he watched us as another 3 men worked on his chains. He asked the Alpha, any idea what they were after? I have never heard of an attacking group simply chaining up enforcers. They usually try to kill them outright. I am glad that I am alive, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. Roland and Trevor exchanged a glance before Roland spoke. This was actually a pack from the south. Part of their plan was to come here to wipe out our pack and kidnap the women and children to boost their own numbers. The main reason that they simply tranquilized everyone was because they knew that there was one person in particular that they were after, but they weren't sure exactly who it was yet. They didn't want to risk killing the person they came for. Tony looked confused as he asked, Who were they after? He sounded just as confused as I felt. Why would a pack attack another pack just to kidnap one member? Confusion was present in the minds of everyone else who was listening, except for the 2 Alphas and Beta. Roll and glanced at me. They were after Jade, although none of them realized it. I was stunned, and in surprise, blurted out, Me why? Will gave a growl and shook as he battled for control. The fact that the chains prevented him from shifting into his larger wolf shape was probably the only reason he was still human. Roll and sighed before responding. Greed. Somehow, They figured out that someone in our pack was able to scent truffles. Our pack has made nearly $N with those truffles at various auctions since you came. We took care that no outsider would be able to figure out who found them. But apparently, it wasn't enough. Trevor spoke up. We interrogated a couple of the attackers, although it wasn't much of an interrogation since they freely spoke to us. And their stories all line up. The Alpha wanted the money. He planned on questioning people until he found someone who would tell him who was locating the truffles, even if he had to torture someone to get their mate to spill the secret. He planned on destroying this pack to hide his actions, but was going to take the unmated women and children with him. Many were only here because he threatened their mates. I sent my second son down there to take control until we figure things out. From what I hear, they will happily accept him since he would never threaten mates. One guy came running up with a cutting torch and a shield to slip under the chains to protect Will from the torch. Will's eyes lit up. About time. Get these things off of me. I chuckled, and Will glared at me for having the audacity to make fun of him in this situation. Chapter 51. I watched as the chain was finally cut. I helped to unwrap the numerous loops of chain before I was suddenly engulfed in a big hug. I was held too tightly to even hug him back. With a light chuckle, I responded, Will, take it easy. You are stronger than me. His arms loosened, although he didn't release me. He buried his face in my hair and mumbled, You have no idea how glad I am to have you in my arms again. Are you sure that you are all right? Yes, I am fine. He sighed and scooped me into his arms. I protested, Will, put me down. What are you doing? He held me close to his chest. Getting a second opinion. You probably wouldn't admit to an injury, even if you did have one. I rolled my eyes at his paranoia. I am a runt, not some prideful fighter. Will didn't respond as he started walking. I turned my head to look at the Alpha with pleading eyes. Alpha rolled and grinned at my expression. Everyone else got checked by the pack doctors, so you might as well too. Especially since I hear you were running around in the forest doing who knows what. Trevor chuckled. What he really means is that if he doesn't agree, Will would probably flatten him and then take you to the doctors anyways. I chuckled despite myself that did sound like Will when the mate bond was in overdrive. Will grumbled. I don't even want to know how many rabbit burrows you went down today. I raised my chin in defiance. Guess two. He snorted in plain disbelief. Right. Is the truth. The rest of the time, I was climbing trees and pretending to be a monkey. Will gritted his teeth as his muscles tensed. I heard the others behind us laughing at his reaction. Will glared at them over his shoulder and the noise stopped. The doctor poked my ribs gently as Will watched from the other side of the room. He told Will, 1 or 2 small bruises, but they will be healed by sunset. He pulled out a stethoscope and put it over my heart. He moved to my back and put it under my shoulder blade, listening to my lungs. He moved it lower, and Will growled as his hand went under my shirt. The doctor glanced at him with a faint challenge in his gaze, stating, I have my own mate waiting for me at home. If you want me to stop the exam, let me know. Will silently fumed as he gritted his teeth. The doctor moved the scope to the middle of my back, and I felt something pique his interest and he moved the scope down to my side. He came around to the front to lift my shirt a bit to place the stethoscope on my stomach above my belt. Well, which? Well, congratulations on the new addition to your family. I blinked in surprise at his words. How had he discovered that? I would have thought their heartbeats would have been too quiet to detect yet. Will was confused and asked, What do you mean? Will's eyes suddenly widened. Wait. Are you saying? The doctor smiled and nodded. She can't be far along since I can barely hear the heartbeat. But you are going to be a father. Will jumped up with a whoop before picking me up and spinning in a circle. Well, there went all of the surprise planning I had been working on. The doctor shook his head at Will's over-exuberance. Easy with her. She isn't a ragdoll. Will put me down, although he held me close to his side as he quickly asked, Is the child okay? The doctor nodded calmly. There is no sign of a blow or injury to the stomach. and she didn't get hit with any of the tranquilizer, so they are both fine. Come back for an ultrasound in 3 weeks or so. She is still able to exercise, but just keep her from anything really strenuous. Will look down at me with a grin. That means no more trips down rabbit holes or climbing into trees. Your days of pretending to be a rabbit or monkey are over for quite some time. I grinned at him. You should just be glad that I never particularly wanted to try flying like a bird. Will shook his head, muttering, You are going to be the death of me one day. Chapter 52. I grinned as I watched Jisk give Ruby a rose. He had thoughtfully stripped the spines off of the stem. Ruby threw her arms around his neck as she planted a kiss on his cheek. Jisk could barely be pried away from Ruby's side, and she was just as enamored with him. She had agreed to the odd conditions revolving around the meeting in curiosity. Within the hour, the sunglasses had come off, and they had rarely left one and other's side in the 2 weeks since. Glanced at me. Will commented, I simply cannot think of mates that are suited for one another. Except for us, of course. I replied thoughtfully. They are so alike that it is almost scary you, and I seem to almost be opposites in most things. Jisk and Ruby came to sit on a padded garden bench across from us. Will regarded Jisk with amusement. I think I like you better like this, Will said, smiling and relaxed instead of being like that cold, distant assassin who was creeping around our territory. Tilting his head slightly, Jisk responded in a serious tone. You should have seen me a decade ago. Back then, I truly was cold-hearted and had killed many lawless with little regard. Ruby blinked in fascination of this new information. What happened? Jisk glanced at me in amusement. That little half-grown one somehow managed to sneak up on me and then wedged herself in my heart before I realized exactly what happened. I could feel Ruby's jealousy rising slightly, along with her confusion. She slowly said, I am not sure I understand. Jisk gazed into her eyes and ran his thumb along her cheek as he explained. She was a half-grown pup alone in no man's land. Even as cold as my heart was, I couldn't just leave her there alone. I took her to a few packs trying to get her adopted. Every pack wanted me, but refused her because she was a runt. Days turned into months as I showed her everything I could. At that point, I knew the chances of her ever joining a pack were slim to none. He took a slow, shaky breath. After my first mate rejected me for power, I thought that I was incapable of ever feeling love again. Will's swift intake of breath showed his surprise. Ruby was sympathetic, but had heard that part before. I blinked in slow surprise. I had not expected that Jisk would be talking about that old event so openly, proof that the mate bond with Ruby was already making a deep impact. Jisk glanced at me and continued. Somehow, she managed to wiggle her way into my heart. Her humor and good spirits were never crushed by the thought of being a rogue. She didn't even seem particularly bothered by the fact that she would likely never have a mate. It was almost a year before I realized what she had accomplished. She was the daughter that I never had, but had always dreamed of. She allowed me to feel love once more. Her presence helped me begin to move on from the pain of the rejection. I blinked tears away. Jisk had never told me this before. I got up and went over to Jisk, who gave me a hug. I quietly said, You never told me that before. I had always thought of you as a brother. He laughed shakily as he released me. I am stubborn and have far too much pride for my own good. Although, those abilities of yours were a constant ego check. I hope that people never learn how easily you could track me and sneak up on me. Ruby chuckled in understanding. Oh, I have some experience in that area. She is evil. It was like she knew exactly where I was at any given time. Jisk. Will. And I laughed at her unwitting words. And Ruby looked between the three of us in confusion. I grinned at her. Ruby, I actually did know exactly where you were, if you were in the immediate area. She blinked in confusion, still not understanding how. I was designated as an Omega for just over a year, so I could actually sense your presence. That was how I evaded you so easily. Her jaw dropped, and Jisk used his finger to gently close it again. She recovered and exclaimed, "That was how you did it." I thought it was a skill that only someone living as a rogue for years could develop. I shook my head, still grinning widely. Good rogues are almost as observant, but it simply can't compare to those abilities. I glanced up as footsteps approached. Tony smiled at us in greeting. "Which abilities?" he inquired, having just caught the last few words. Ruby glanced up and grinned mischievously as she said, "We were just discussing what abilities enforcers had when it came to escaping." Roll and rounded the corner with Emily. Tony scratched his head in confusion. "Enforcers usually don't run. Our mindset is geared to stand and fight most of the time." Roll and raised an eyebrow in amusement as he approached. "Which one of my enforcers is running away?" Ruby pointed her thumb at Tony. "He is." Tony looked confused. I have never had thoughts of leaving the pack. Except if he froze and turned his head to face me with wide eyes. "No, please tell me she isn't saying what I think she is saying." It was Roland's turn to look confused. "What is Ruby getting at?" I grinned silently at Tony's pleading tone, letting my silence speak for me. Tony gave a huge sigh as he accepted Ruby's comment as the truth. He said, "She is saying that you are about to see firsthand just how overprotective an enforcer mate can get." Roland glanced at me with a grin. "Congratulations." He turned to Tony. "It can't be that bad." I remember when Evan's mother was carrying him and his father was an enforcer. Jisk cleared his throat, catching Roland's attention. Jisk raised an eyebrow like an old teacher faced with a dense student. "And Will is an enforcer," he said, as if what he was saying should be obvious. "You may want to connect those dots with the mate bond in mind." Roland blinked in confusion. Then his eyes widened. "Oh no." Tony grinned as he got some of his own revenge. "Oh yes, just like that record. I plan to visit another pack when she is close to delivery. I will return once the child is born." Roland raised his eyebrows. "And just how will you know when it is safe to return?" Tony smirked in my direction. "Jade isn't that big. And Will is an enforcer. Any kids will be huge. I will probably hear her yelling at Will regardless of where I am. Once the kid has to come out." I glared at Tony, who unremorsefully grinned back at me. I glanced up at Will, who looked down into my eyes. I spoke in a mischievous tone. "Shall we tell them that we are actually expecting twins?" His eyes widened in pride, excitement, and terror. Tony turned and started running away as he called back, "That's it. I am heading over to Trevor's pack. Call me when it is over." Jisk leaned over to whisper in Ruby's ear, "How does a 9-month vacation sound?" Under the guise of trading relations. Of course. I shook my head as my friends made plans to desert me. I was the only one who would be unable to make escape plans for when Will would be going overboard in several months. Epilogue. Nancy. Get out of that tree this instant. I don't care what Uncle Jisk tells you. I glanced over as Will ran over to haul our 5-year-old daughter out of the tree. She squirmed in his grip. "But Mommy does it all the time." "That is beside the point," he said, shaking his head. "If I had my way, she wouldn't do it either." Jisk and Ruby rounded the corner of the house with a chuckle ever heard Will's words. Ruby shook her head in mock sadness. "Nancy, remember what we told you. Don't climb trees if your dad can see you." Ruby. Will was not impressed. I laughed, and he turned to face me. "You are not helping." Nancy pouted. "But Nigel gets to climb trees." Will shook his head. "Not if I catch him." He doesn't. Jisk and his wife wandered closer. A young pup ran around Ruby's feet while an older one stalked through the bushes. Their 2 kids were bundles of energy and most determined to use it. "Uncle Jisk, catch me." Will jumped in surprise as Nancy's twin jumped out of the tree above him into Jisk's arms. Will shook his head in exasperation. "What is it with you people and trees? We are wolves, not squirrels." Nancy gave Will a big hug. "They are really fun to climb. Honest, you would love it if you tried it. Just like when you told me that I would like Brussels sprouts." Jisk smiled softly at the child. Nancy, your father is simply too heavy for most branches. They would break under his weight. Nancy looked sad as she exclaimed, "That is terrible. You mean he is stuck on the ground?" I started laughing as Will made a face at her perspective. I paused and took a deep breath before looking at Ruby with an incredulous expression. She blinked in surprise as she noticed, clearly knowing what I had just scented. Jisk put my son down and took Ruby's hand as he commented, "I told you so." Will asked, "What am I missing?" He knew the three of us had a rogue sense of smell and picked up more than anyone else in the pack. I explained, "It is a good thing that Jisk chose a house with 3 rooms for kids. All 3 will be in use by midsummer." Ruby said, "I thought that Jisk's claims were out to lunch when the pregnancy test came back as negative. But if you picked it up, then the test was obviously faulty." Jisk looked amused at her reaction, as if he couldn't figure out why she would even doubt his word. Will turned his head as he looked around before asking, "Where did Tim get to this time?" I had been keeping tabs on my 2-year-old son with my senses. "In the garden, eating your carrots." Will sighed as he put Nancy down. He wrapped his arms around me instead as he said, "Why do you 3 insist on teaching the kids to climb and hide?" Jisk replied for me, "You have 3 kids and a mate. If they happen to be in different areas and an attack occurs, you can only go rescue one at a time. Being able to escape into the trees gives them edge in case trouble shows up. Your mate can run down a rabbit burrow, but your kids can't do that, so they have to learn to climb very well. We are simply ensuring that they have the best chances of survival." Will grumbled, not liking Jisk's logic. He had grown more tolerant of my underground explorations as long as he knew ahead of time, and only if the burrow was unoccupied. Will narrowed his eyes at Jisk. "If they fall out of a tree and break their arm, I am holding you responsible." Jisk wasn't bothered by the threatened grinned easily. "If they break their arm, then you have my permission to chase me down and take a strip out of my hide." Will scrunched up his nose. Ruby and I snickered. If Jisk took to the trees, Will would be unable to get at him. 3 kids kept Will too busy for him to try and wait for Jisk to come down. Jisk was even better at pulling a disappearing act than I was. Jisk walked over to clap me on the shoulder. "See, he gives in easier all the time. It will be a breeze with the next kid." Will shook his head. "That is going to be a long time in coming." Jisk grinned smugly at him. "Sure. Believe what you want to." Ruby narrowed her eyes at Jisk's tone, possibly sensing something through her mate bond. She took a deep breath before her eyes widened no. She exclaimed, "How could you 2 do this to us? We barely survived the last 2 times. I think you 2 need to visit no man's land for the next 7 months." Will's jaw dropped. "Dade, are you pregnant?" I stuck my tongue out at Ruby. Spoil sport. I glanced between the 2 men before asking her, "So, do you think our darling mates are going to get along since they will be in the same boat? Or will they be at one another's throats in a few months?" Ruby blinked as it dawned on her that both of our mates would be overreacting in a short time. She tried to visualize the potential outcomes. If they team up, all 4 of us are going to be exiled for some time. The pack might just build a house on the border and simply count on those 2 to annihilate any trespassers. However, if they do keep attacking each other, then we can sneak off for some peace and quiet while they are busy beating on each other. Will and Jisk both narrowed their eyes at us. Jisk glanced at Will speculatively. "Well, Bethel which, well, I count Jade as a daughter. So if you can see Ruby as part of your family, we won't have problems with each other." Will tilted his head as he examined the idea before replying, "I think it can be done. One perk is that we can take turns to ensure that they are never alone. Any threat would have a hard time getting through one of us, but with 2 of us, we could probably flatten anything if we put our minds to it." Ruby looked at me with wide eyes. "Around-the-clock surveillance. I think I will go mad. That is, if those 2 don't drive everyone else in the pack crazy first." Both Will and Jisk with the situation now that it meant their mates would be better guarded if they worked together. Glancing at Ruby, I said, I say we leave them on babysitting duty and take a vacation by ourselves. Have some quality girl time. Perhaps we could invite Tiffany along as well. She knows all of the good stores in the nearby packs. She probably wouldn't mind a break from her children either. Both Will and Jisk growled as they objected to that idea. We glanced at them, and Ruby shook her head sadly. Alas, there goes that plan, she said. We might have to work on it over the next few months. She sighed and shrugged as she dismissed the concern for the moment. Well. We were heading to the store and just stopped by to say hi. See you at dinner, I replied. See you later. Their 2 kids followed them, preferring to run in wolf form. I watched them leave as Will walked up beside me and wrapped his arm around my shoulders. The twins were back in the tree again. Tim was still using a carrot as a chew toy. I was happy. I could not think of any way that life could be better. I loved Will, and he still loved me. Our 3 children were a constant delight. I enjoyed seeing Jisk finally smile on a daily basis after all of these years. Ruby had a mate that was always one step ahead of her. Jisk, Ruby, and I often located the valuable truffles that raised more than enough money to support the entire pack and ensure that every member was well off. The Alpha and Luna lived their own long, awaited children and were carefully raising them to treat the pack members with respect. I smiled as no darkness was visible anywhere in our future. I had finally found a place where I truly belonged.